Coming up on the Sky News Daily with me, Niall Paterson, the changing of the guard at Glastonbury. As founder, Michael Eavis hands his controlling stake in the world-famous festival to his daughter, we ask, just who is Emily Eavis? Now, I remember my first trip to Glastonbury. Well, some of it anyway. I was barely in my 20s and thus able to go days tolerating living on little more than lager, pot noodles and wet wipe showers. It was a revelation. The music, the art, the food, even the toilets. It all combined to make the almost mythical Glastonbury experience that keeps people going back year after year after year. The festival is now so much bigger than when I first went, and it's almost entirely unrecognisable when you compare it to the first almost 55 years ago. But it still has a socially aware, counter-cultural core, and that's down in no small measure to its founder, Michael Eavis.
Well, we always think we're going to run out of big bands, but they keep coming through every year, so there's always some out there.
But the times they are a-changing, as Bob Dylan sang at Glasgow many years ago. Apparently for tax purposes, Michael has transferred much of his financial interest in the festival to his daughter Emily. Not a complete surprise. The two have been running the show together for many years.
Paul McCartney has to be about the best thing, really, I think.
Radiohead, particularly in '97, which was just that amazing gig. And Primal Scream, Chemical Brothers in 2000, when the crowd was just enormous because the fence came down.
Yeah, what about Robbie? I mean, Robbie wasn't going to do it, you know, and it was you encouraging me as well. You were keeping on saying, get Robbie, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. I thought it would be good.
So I made it happen.
So as Glastonbury kicks off properly and the festival enters this new era, we thought we'd look back at how it all began and find out a bit more about the new boss, Emily Eavis. So, in just a while, we'll be chatting to one of the festival's creative directors and the artist behind the iconic car henge. But we're going to start with Glastonbury veteran Claire Gregory, also our entertainment editor. Claire, good to see you. So what is it exactly that makes the sort of people that attend Glastonbury year after year bang on about it quite as much as...
It does inspire kind of almost like a cult-like following. So it was, born out of the counterculture in the 1960s. And yeah, of course, like as time's gone on, corporations have come in and things have changed a bit. But I think it does do its best to kind of continue to be ethical and environmental. And, if you go to the Stone Circle and the Healing Fields, which are kind of, fields away, if you will, from kind of the main stages where all the rowdy music's going on, those hippie traditions, they are still there. You can feel all of that still. And I think that's probably at the heart of what makes it quite so special.
And certainly to the family that is at the heart of it, the Eavises, how unusual is it for one family to be at the heart of something so culturally significant in the UK?
I mean, I'd say extremely unusual. It is a cultural kind of touch point. It's such a big deal for so many reasons. We often think of the music, and of course that's a big part of it, but there's every kind of performance art going on. In fact, the real name of Glastonbury is Glastonbury Performing Arts Festival. It's far more than just music. And it manages to be a kind of leader in these kind of areas, and it's seen as a pinnacle of lots of artists' career.
So we got a whole lot of other stuff, isn't it? All the theatre, the circus, the Las Vegas, and there's poetry, and there's green politics, and there's green debates, and there's flowers, and we've got train sets, we've got ghost trains, we've got a lot,
It's not just about the musicians. There's a whole heap of creativity in all its forms generated by people like Joe Rush. Now, he's an artist responsible for the iconic car henge and is one of the festival's creative directors. Joe, just how did you get first involved in Glastonbury? Did Michael have a hand in it?
Well, inadvertently. What it was that basically I was in a squat in London. This was in 1985. And I'd got a burned out bus that I'd turned into a giant skull. I put all my sculptures on them, my metal sculptures. And my intention was to drive to Stonehenge Free Festival in 1985. But what happened was that Margaret Thatcher had set up a roadblock to stop the travellers going in, to stop the peace convoy going in. And by the time we'd actually got ready to leave London in our skull bus, Middle England was in lockdown. And so we decided to go to Glastonbury. And so that was how we ended up at Glastonbury. And the first person we met, funny enough, was Michael. It was a muddy year. We towed the thing in the mud and parked up in front of the main stage, which was probably a bit cheeky. And Michael turned up in a Land Rover. And I was such an arsey little brat at the time, you know. I had a shouting match with him in the middle of the field. But eventually, you know, we worked it out, and got a very good. He's a very good judge of character, Michael. He's a very good judge of what's going to make that festival better.
But in terms of the festival, clearly Michael Eavis knows how to put on a big old music festival. But as an individual, personality-wise, what's he like? I mean, you must have spent plenty of time with him over the years now.
Yeah, I mean, he's a proper old rascal. Let's be right about it. You know, he's a proper old rascal, and you know, to make that festival happen, you know, he's had times where they've refused his license, times where other people have taken his license off him and forced him to bend over barrel to make the festival happen. He's been through so much. He's been through riots and, you know, COVID and all these other things, and he just kind of just deals with it. You know, he deals with it. And at any point, he just explodes into laughter. And I've never known a man who would just open his mouth and roar with laughter at any point in however tense a situation it is. And I think it's probably what's got him through.
Joe, you know I'm going to have to pick you up on the use of the word rascal. I have to hear more about that, because he just strikes me as a lovely old gentleman farmer. There's a rapscallion side to him, is there?
Well, but be honest, there's a rapscallion side to any gentleman farmer. You know, farmers are farmers. You know? and Mike is a farmer first and foremost, and he will tell you that himself. He's a dairy farmer, you know, and I've been up there in 1987 when there was, you know, 250,000 people in that festival, and gone to look for him and found him in the milking shed, milking the cows, you know, like, so he's a proper farmer. He is a bit of a rascal, but, you know, you have to be a bit of a rascal to be in the rock and roll business, don't you, really? But he's a straightforward man, he's an honest man, and he's a very kind man. Very supportive for people. He can see if someone's going to be good, and he picks up on it straight away, and he's practically always right. So he's got a very good intuition, which is why the festival is what it is.
Now, Joe, I'm going to be slightly cheeky here. Before the cameras were rolling and the microphones were switched on, you told me that there had been some wild nights with the Eavises down at Glastonbury. I'm not asking for lots of specific details, but just give us a flavour of how wild can be down at Worthy Farm.
Well, you know, the thing that Michael always states as one of his favourite things was when he first put up the first fence and people pushed it down and the thousands of people ran across the fields. And Michael, who really should have been mortified, was absolutely gleeful, you know, to see these hordes of people just running in, you know, fighting for freedom. And he loved it, and that's what kind of says the character of the man.
It does feel that the festival is in a something of a period of transition. Michael stepping away and Emily stepping up, although of course she's been heavily involved in the running of the festival for a number of years. I mean, personality-wise, how does she compare to her father?
She's not the same as her father, but she's got a brilliance as well, and especially on, you know, environmental and social. The way that the festival is moving, the way it's become more inclusive, the way that, you know, the way we're bringing in people who wouldn't normally come to that festival. One of her really big, and thing I think I was most impressed with, was her determination to stop the use of single-use plastic in the festival. So she's got a very strong social drive as to how the festival can progress. And Michael's got this fantastic idea of what will really stand out in the festival, you know. So they're not the same, but they're both really positive drivers to the festival.
Back to our entertainment editor, Claire Gregory, by now champing at the bit to be heading down to Glastonbury. Claire, clearly it wasn't always as it is now. From tiny acorns, massive festivals apparently grow. So how did it all begin?
It's an unusual story. Michael and his then wife, they went to see a gig themselves. They went to see Led Zeppelin at an open-air concert in Bath, which is just kind of down the road from Somerset. And it was after that they decided to put on what was then called the Pop, Folk and Blues Festival. That was in 1970. And even that was attended by 1,500 people, which isn't bad when you think of just hosting a kind of a party of 100 people is enough effort. So pretty impressive that that's where they started. And in fact, they'd booked the Kinks. You know, this is a band that everyone, even today, has still heard
Ray
of.
Davis.
They
famous.
They were supposed to headline, but actually they were replaced at the last minute by a band which were then known as Tyrannosaurus Rex. Of course, we know them as T-Rex.
Mark Bolan.
Yeah, Mark Bolan took to the stage. Now, tickets then cost a massive whopping £1.
Really?
£1. And that included this is amazing, free milk from the farm. So as part of your pound ticket price, you got you some milk from the farm, from the dairy cows. Now, I have checked, and that is equivalent to sort of nearly £20 by today's money, which is still a bargain. I mean, you could barely get a pint of milk for that, can you not?
I don't know if that's entirely true. But you look at the scale of the festival now, and you look at those inauspicious beginnings back in the early 70s. I mean, how does one go from that field to where we are now?
Yeah, there were. And it kind of, after that very initial event in 1970, then the next year was a free festival, Glastonbury Fair. And then from that, that's really what Glastonbury that we know kind of morphed from. It started making profit in 1981. And that was at the point where Michael Eavis started kind of giving that profit away again to worthy causes that we still see kind of at Glastonbury today. Oxfam, Greenpeace, WaterAid, these are all causes that he's been supporting for many, many years. But, you know, there were ups and downs in the 70s and 80s. There were some issues with council charges, with the local district council saying that they'd broken some rules. There was a big row between security and looters one year. But once it got to the 90s, it was smoother sailing. And in fact, possibly one of the trickiest parts in Glastonbury's history was, in fact, the pandemic years. Michael Eavis actually gave an interview in 2020 saying he thought they might go bankrupt if they didn't have another festival in 2021. But Emily has talked about how good they are at evolving the festival, and that's how they made it through the pandemic. But like many, many live events, that was probably one of the most difficult phases for them.
Let's turn to Emily Eavis, the daughter, because back in, I think it was 1999, Michael Eavis' wife, that he founded Glastonbury with, she very sadly passed away. And this was the point at which the transition began to start happening?
Yeah, and it sounds like it was incredibly organic. Emily was the youngest of her siblings. And so when her mum got very poorly, her older siblings, they had kids and jobs and lives. And Emily was studying at college at the time. And so it just seemed natural that she would be the one that would go home to kind of support and help with the family. And then when her mum died, her mum had been a huge part of Glastonbury as well. And I think she's said in interviews that she and Michael at that point really threw themselves into kind of putting on the next Glastonbury in a kind of almost like a tribute. And it was from then that kind of really set the wheels in motion. And it's almost as if she sort of never went back. She's said multiple times that it wasn't the life plan. It was never like, I'm going to take on the family business. She thought she was going to be a primary school teacher.
But at the same time, Glastonbury, if you are the daughter of Michael Eavis, I mean, it has to be a pretty big part of your life when you've got, I don't know, however many rock stars sitting round the kitchen table sharing a cup of tea with you.
I've got lots of memories of sort of like mayhem around that time of year, just from a child's perspective, like lots of like activity and people rushing around. But a specific memory was when I was 5 and I ended up playing violin on the main stage. I have no idea how it actually happened, but I used to play the violin from when I was about 3. And I think I used to sometimes go into denial of the festival, like shut myself off and just play my violin. And for some reason, I ended up like going on before the headliner on a Saturday night, and you missed it. There you go.
So I missed the whole thing, unfortunately.
You know, it's absolutely incredible. And I just think perhaps being there and absorbing it as she grew up, even though she didn't realise it at the time, that would have been kind of preparing her to end up taking it on. And, you know, no one knows how weird their childhood is, right? Until they're older. So I guess at the time she didn't realise how unusual it all was.
But has she then followed entirely in her father's footsteps, or has she put her own stamp on it?
No, she's definitely put her own stamp on it. I mean, she sort of was the person to book the first hip-hop headliner, Jay-Z. And I'm sure, you know, anyone that has read a Glastonbury headline in their time will remember the sort of controversy.
The country lost its mind over that. Jay-Z, a rapper, headlining Glastonbury. Who'd have thunk it? But he killed it, though, didn't he?
He absolutely did. And it really did it stamped this kind of new phase of Glastonbury to kind of move away from these maybe traditional kind of rock and alternative music roots and say, look, we are about more than just one thing. It is, as I was saying earlier, it's a kind of totally diverse lineup. And the idea that a headliner had to come with guitars and that, it seems quite odd now, but it was a controversial decision at the time. And she was proven right, I suppose. And I suppose that was maybe quite critical for her.
So clearly Emily has had a practical effect on the festival, but how else is she making these changes felt?
You know, she is an advocate for female equality. And in 2023, post-pandemic, Glastonbury came under fire for its all-male lineup. You had Guns N' Roses and Elton John and Arctic Monkeys. And she was in a bit of a bind anyway because of the way the pandemic had come and things had moved around. Artists were no longer available. I think, you know, it was probably a more limited kind of a range of options that she had than usual. But she did at the time speak publicly and said, look, it's the music industry, it's the pipeline. I can only put on headliners that are available. You know, if there aren't enough women to put on, then I can't do it. And then, of course, last year there were the 2 female headliners with Dua Lipa and SZA. So in that sense, she is also making her mark. And then the other big thing is the environmental stuff. In 2019, it was her that was behind the decision to kind of ban all the single-use plastic bottles and, you know, cut that waste and, you know, support the environment in that way.
But brass tacks here, Claire, it's not the same, is it? It's not what it once was. It is too commercial these days. I speak not on my own behalf, but on behalf of the many people listening to this podcast that aren't quite as Glasto-daft as you.
Well, I think it has changed. Of course it has over the years. I mean, the reality is now it's £378.50 for your ticket. God. And you don't even get free milk with that. You know, it's 200,000 people just with that ticket price alone. Of course, do the maths. That's a huge amount of money for a pair of people to go. And that's just your entry. You know, after that, you've got to be able to buy food, drink, everything else.
And plenty of people pitch up how many days before the festival even starts, so they can get somewhere to sleep.
So that you can sleep somewhere half decent, yeah. That doesn't feel like those kind of stone circle, kind of hippie routes of where it started. So
sandals and wet wipes. Yeah. It's not quite the same, is it?
Exactly that. So yeah, of course it's changed. Of course it has. But it has to evolve if it wants to keep selling out.
But none of which is to say that, you know, Emily Eavis doesn't have challenges ahead.
No, of course. The festival, all festivals are beset by kind of issues, things like rising costs. You know, you're competing for the best artists. You've got to watch out with all those conditions of licence put on you from local councils and things like that. I mean, operational costs are up, staffing costs, everything. It is hard. But then you look at Glastonbury, I just checked, again, it sold out in 35 minutes last year. And you think, well, they're doing something right that other festivals aren't.
Thanks, Claire. And you can keep up with all the events at Worthy Farm. Just head to the website, skynews.com. And if you're off to the festival, do make sure to drink plenty of water and don't forget your wet wipes. The Daily is back on Monday. I hope you have a cracking weekend.